Hello again, secure transaction students. This is part 2 in our video lecture on buyers and secure transactions. And I posted that last brief video just parsing the rules and provisions of Article 9 that deal with buyers, the general buyer rule, the buyer in the ordinary course of business rule, the purchase money secured party, super priority over buyers during the 20-day grace period. And so today we're going to get to the problems. So we're going to start with problem 80, we're going to do problem 80, 81, 82, and then 85. There's also the International Harvester case that was assigned, and I will discuss that. We can discuss that and debate it a little bit in class when we get together on Tuesday. So let's start with, jump right into problem 80. I'll read a little bit here. Betty Consumer bought a television set from Distortion TV, a terrible name. Whaley gets so cute with these names, it aggravates me sometimes, but maybe you find it fun. I find it a little condescending. But Betty Consumer bought a television set from Distortion TV Incorporated, a retail store. And a month later, Distortion went bankrupt. And a minor functionary from Octopus National Bank, ONB, showed up on her stoop, Betty Consumer's stoop, and asked her to turn over the set. They're enforcing their security interest. Octopus National Bank had a security interest on the inventory of Distortion TV, and now they wanted to get at it in the hands of a buyer. He explained that ONB held a perfected security interest in all of Distortion's inventory, and that since Distortion had not paid off its debts to ONB, the bank was repossessing Betty's TV. So here comes the first question. A. What should Ms. Consumer tell the bank's flunky? C9320A. And of course this is the buyer in the ordinary course of business rule. Betty is buying a TV from a merchant who is in the business of selling goods of the kind. And of course a buyer in the ordinary course of business takes free of all security interests created by the buyer's seller. Whether they had knowledge of it or whether the security interest was perfected, it doesn't matter, and we all know that intuitively. You buy a TV from a store, buy it on credit, and they take a purchase money security interest in it, and it's consumer goods, and it's automatically perfected, therefore doesn't matter. You're a buyer in the ordinary course of business, you get the TV. So that's she should tell him to go away because she's a buyer in the ordinary course of business. Unfortunately, a lot of people may not know that, and they let them come in and take it. So that's unfortunate. But you know better. You would never let them do it, and you don't buy stuff on credit anyway. You guys are going to have plenty of cash. B. Would it matter if she had known that ONB had a perfected security interest in Distortion's inventory? No. Buyer in the ordinary course of business takes free of a security interest created by the buyer seller, created by Distortion TV. Whether it's perfected and whether the buyer has any knowledge, doesn't matter. Which is converse to the general rule of a buyer. A buyer other than a buyer in the ordinary course of business will not take free if the security interest is perfected or if the buyer has knowledge of the security interest. But if you're bio-cob, doesn't matter if it's perfected or if you have knowledge. C. Would it matter if she, Betty Consumer, bought it at a liquidation sale and was informed by the store's owner that the store planned to file a bankruptcy petition the following week? You know, this could be argued anyway. I think the case here that's cited says no, it doesn't matter. You're still a bio-cob, and that it's a liquidation sale. It doesn't matter. But I think there is an argument to be made, and if you look at the definition of the buyer in the ordinary course of business, which I've really focused in on the core of it, that a buyer in the ordinary course of business is someone that buys goods from a seller who's in the business of selling goods of that kind, basically a retail store. But the definition is a little bit longer, and there are some twists and turns, and one of the twists is that the person must buy goods, I'm looking at the code here, a person must buy goods in the ordinary course if the sale to the it has to be in the ordinary course of business and it has to comport with the usual and customary practices in the kind of the business. So there could be an argument made here that a liquidation sale is not the ordinary course of business, that this is some kind of extraordinary sale, and that therefore the person does not deserve the status of a buyer in the ordinary course of business. So it could be argued either way. I would come down, I think case law comes down in the majority as saying that you still have BioCob status. But there's a small gray area. D. What if Miss Consumer had put the TV on layaway and had paid 50% of the price, but permitted Distortion to keep the TV, and then the store filed for bankruptcy, and the Whaley directs us to 2502. So, she's a buyer in the ordinary course of business, but she hasn't paid for the entire TV yet. So should the bank be able to come in, and it's in possession of Distortion TV still, so should the bank be able to come in and take it and repossess it, or should she be able to take it and keep it as the buyer in the ordinary course of business? And 2502 helps us out by saying that she will get buyer in the ordinary course of business status as long as she can pay the full purchase price. If she can't, then the bank is going to get it. So if she can come up with the last 50% of the purchase price, fine. She gets buyer in the ordinary course of business status. She can take it free of the security interest. If she can't, then she won't. So that's the answer to problem 80. Let's go on to 81. 81. Okay, now we're dealing with three companies. Deering Milliken, which is the textile manufacturer, Mill, which is the wholesaler that buys from Deering Milliken, and then Tanbro, which is the retailer. So the manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer, not an unusual sequence of outfits. So Deering Milliken, call them Deering, routinely sold textiles on credits to Mill Fabrics, the firm that finished the textiles, into dyed and patterned fabrics, so they actually process the textiles as well. And then Mill would resell the fabrics to Tanbro Fabrics, who is the seller. And while the textiles are still in Deering's warehouse, Mill Fabrics contracted to buy them from Deering, signing a security agreement to the effect of giving Deering a financing to that effect, and giving Deering a financing statement, which it duly filed. So okay, so Mill agreed to purchase these textiles from Deering, entered into a security agreement that Deering would be able to enforce a security agreement against the textiles, and a financing statement was filed, so it was perfected. Okay, and then Mill goes ahead and sells the textiles to Tanbro, which pays Mill Fabrics for them, but doesn't take delivery from Deering for a few weeks. So the fabrics remain in Deering, the manufacturer's possession. Unfortunately, Mill Fabrics becomes insolvent and never paid Deering for the textiles. And Deering therefore refused to deliver them to Tanbro, and Tanbro sued. Tanbro had bought these textiles, and they are in the manufacturer's possession, but the manufacturer has a security interest in them when it sold them to Mill, the middleman. And so now Tanbro wants them. Tanbro paid for them, and Tanbro wants them. Tanbro is this buyer. And who should prevail? And there's a special rule that deals with this, and it's in where is it? In 9320, in the buyer in the ordinary course of business provision, 9320, and it's in E, that possessory security interests are not affected by the buyer in the ordinary course of business rule. And so the general rule is that, Tanbro is a buyer in the ordinary course of business. Even though they're a merchant, they are buying these textiles from Mill, who's in the business of selling textiles. And so you'd think that Tanbro would be able to take free of any security interest that the manufacturer had. but there's an exception to that. If the secured party has a possessory security interest, which is the case here, Deering, the manufacturer, still had those fabrics in their possession. And if that's the case, then the buyer in the ordinary course of business cannot get to the fabrics. And so Deering wins, and Deering gets to keep them. So that's 9320E, an exception to the buyer in the ordinary course of business rule. If the secured party has possession of the goods, they get to keep them. Buyer in the ordinary course of business doesn't get them. And so what remedy is left open to them? Well, they can sue Mill. They can sue Mill under Article 2, Article 2.3.12, which is a general warranty section, and it's a warranty of title. And part of the warranty of title, general part of the warranty of title, is that whoever sells you something is giving you a warranty that they own it. And if they sell you something they don't own, well, then you can sue them for the purchase price and get the purchase price back, because they can't sell you something they don't own. But another corollary to that, another part of the warranty of title, is that you warrant, when you sell something, you warrant that it's free of a security interest. And so if you sell someone something, as in here, when Mill sold Tanbro these fabrics, they warrant to them that there isn't someone with a security interest that's going to come back and take the goods that were sold. And that's what Tanbro can sue under and say, hey, I paid you good money for these fabrics, and now under 9320E, Deering gets to keep them, and so I don't get to get the fabrics. Mill, you've got to refund my purchase price. The problem with that, of course, is that Mill is bankrupt, and that there probably isn't going to be any money for Tanbro. So, you have these legal rights, but sometimes they're hollow. On to problem 82. Okay. Problem 82. Octopus National Bank has a perfected security interest in all the cars on Smiles Motors lot. And Smiles owed $5,000 in insurance premiums to an insurance agent, Howard Teeth, who showed up one morning to buy a new car from Smiles. Now, the president of Smiles first gave Howard a check for $5,000. So Howard came, the insurance agent, came to the lot, wants to buy a car, and the president of Smiles gives him a $5,000 check that he owes him for the insurance premium. And then Howard, the insurance agent, takes the check and gives it back to Smiles and says, I want to use this to buy a car off the lot. And he does. And then the question is Howard a buyer in the ordinary course of business to take free of a security interest that the bank has over the inventory of the Smiles, the cars on Smiles dealership? And the question there is whether or not the car that was bought was worth more than $10,000. I mean, worth more than $5,000, because he paid him $5,000, and if the $5,000 was the price of the car, then yes, no problem. You know, paid him in value in the ordinary course of business. You know, he got the $5,000 check, and then used that money to buy a car in the ordinary course of business. Then yes, he's a buyer in the ordinary course of business. But if there was some cancellation of debt, this is what this problem is getting to, and it's as it's drafted, it's not very well drafted. But I know, because I was reading the teaching manual, I know what Whaley's trying to get at here, and the question is whether there was implicit in this some cancellation of value, some cancellation of debt. If you buy an automobile, for example, as part of a cancellation of debt, if Howard had gone on to Smiles' car lot and said, I want to buy that car, and you give it to me, and we'll cancel this debt that you owe me, this $5,000 debt for insurance premiums, then he would not be a buyer in the ordinary course of business. And that takes us back to the definition of the BioCOB, buyer in the ordinary course of business. 1201, buyer in the ordinary course of business. A9 at the very bottom says a buyer in the ordinary course of business, the last sentence of the definition. A buyer in the ordinary course of business does not include a person that acquires goods in a transfer in bulk, or as security for, or in total or partial satisfaction of a money debt. So, however this problem is written, let's take away that lesson. That if you pay cash, if you pay value for an item when you're buying it from someone who's in the business of selling goods of the kind, then you're a buyer in the ordinary course of business and you take free of any security interest. But if you accept the goods in cancellation of a debt, right? If you said, you owe me $5,000, but if you give me that car, we'll cancel that debt, you're not a buyer in the ordinary course of business. You have to give value. You can't take the goods in cancellation of a debt. So that's the lesson that we should take away from this. I think that it's not phrased very clearly here. But there's a final question of Howard then sold the car. So Howard, this insurance agent, took the car and then sold it again. Would he be liable to Octopus National Bank for conversion? Now, if you take a car that you know is subject to someone else's security interest, and you're not a buyer in the ordinary course of business, then you could be subject to a lawsuit for conversion, which is basically a type of stealing, because you know that someone else has a valid security interest in this automobile, and now you're selling it to someone else and taking cash. Then you could be liable for conversion. So that depends on whether this transaction was for cancellation of a debt or not, and whether Howard knew that it was still subject to a security interest. But this is getting a little far afield, so I'm not going to hold you responsible for this on our exam. Let's get to the final problem. This is a fun little problem that is very common. This is Article 9 in action, that you see in action all across Cleveland every summer, every spring, whenever we have these yard sales. And this is the garage sale, the yard sale exception. That if you buy consumer goods and there's a security interest that attaches to it, and then you sell it on Craigslist or at a yard sale to someone else who's using it for personal, household, consumer purposes, that person is going to take it free of any security interest. Okay? So I'll read the problem. Andy Audio bought a stereo receiver on credit from Voice of Japan Incorporated, an electronics store, giving it a purchase money security interest in the receiver. Alright, so they bought this receiver, the stereo equipment, bought it on credit, gave Voice of Japan a security interest, and it was automatically perfected. Automatically perfected, no financing statement required, because a purchase money security interest in consumer goods automatically perfected. And Voice of Japan did not file a financing statement. Why would it? Didn't need to. Automatically perfected. Then 6 months later, Andy still owed Voice of Japan $300 on this, and he held a garage sale and sold the receiver to Nancy Neighbor for $200 cash. And then Andy defaults on its obligations to Voice of Japan, stops making payments. And the question is, can Voice of Japan repossess the receiver from Nancy? And typically, a secured party can follow can seize the property, the collateral, in the hands of the buyer, but not in this situation when there's a consumer-to-consumer transaction. And so Nancy takes it free of the security interest. But there is one way that Voice of Japan could have protected itself, and that is by filing a financing statement, but it didn't do so. If if it really wanted to protect itself against this scenario, if it were a very high ticket item, maybe a $15,000 high definition TV, and wanted to make sure that it wasn't resold at a garage sale, then a company might make the extra effort of filing a financing statement. And then it would be able to pursue the television, or in this case the receiver, into the hands of the buyer and repossess it. But otherwise, merely because it's perfected, that's not enough. And that's different from the general rule where you have a buyer, and Nancy would just be a buyer because she's not a buyer in the ordinary course of business. She's not buying it from someone that's in the business of selling receivers. She's buying it at a garage sale from some guy that just wants to unload his receiver. And typically, she would be subject to the security interest as long as it were perfected. Right? That's the general buyer rule. As long as it's perfected, the secured party can pursue it in the hands of the buyer. But not in this garage sale scenario when it's a consumer selling it to another consumer. That second buyer, that consumer buyer, can take it free of the security interest. But the only way that a company can protect against that is actually by filing a financing statement. Typically, if they're selling to a consumer, the company is the retailer selling to a consumer, they don't, because they get the automatic perfection. They don't file a financing statement. But they open themselves up to this garage sale exception. And maybe this is to protect people. There are garage sales all over the place, and we want to protect the general American practice of allowing garage sales and not subjecting people to security interests. And if a company is really concerned about this issue, they can protect themselves, but they have to take this extra step of filing a financing statement. So that takes us through problem 85. So we'll prepare the next assignment on statutory liens for Tuesday, and then on Thursday we're getting into fixtures. So I look forward to that, and we'll talk about this International Harvester case as well on Tuesday. So I hope that all made sense. Send me emails if you want to clarify anything, and I look forward to seeing you all Tuesday.